Well, happy Friday, everybody. Welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. It's great to see you tonight. Friday again. Oh, gosh, it just goes by so fast, doesn't it? Every day is like a crazy carousel. It's great to see you. And, I feel like tonight's show is different. Something we haven't done exactly ever before, but something I haven't certainly done lately. And what happened that led up to the show is that, I've got a lot of email notifications set to tell me when lots of different kinds of things happen in the fiber world. And I've got notifications set for things that happen in sort of the copyright-free domain when new images are dropped into the public domain. I get notifications from different museums for that. There are some museums that I just watch like a hawk, and I get a lot more notifications about things that are coming and going, and museum business and things like that. And one of those museums is the Folk Art Museum in New York City, because it is so right up our alley with what we love. They've got textiles, they've got which include like samplers, hook rugs, embroideries. They've got paintings, folk paintings, portraiture, foil pictures, also known as tinsel pictures. They've got so many different kinds of items in the Folk Art Museum, and they're all so different and so relatable to what we do in a thrift craft, right, in rug hooking. So I got a notification from them a few days ago, and it was an email to say, like, here's some of the new things that we've acquired at the museum. And I was scrolling through them and thinking, whoa, such good things. I mean, I just focused on mostly textile things for tonight, but there were some new rugs that came in, including a couple of Hutchinson rugs. I don't know anybody at the museum. Some museums I do, this museum I don't. So I don't, like, it's always interesting to know according to who's in charge. And of course, it's not just somebody's job. It's like the governing board and everything selecting what pieces to acquire next. I think we have a visitor. Oh, hey, gosh, there he is. There's my man. There's my man. He guts to give me a hug.
Love you.
I love you too, honey. It's Friday.
All right,
it's happy Friday time.
Yeah, I might. Is it fine if we do something tomorrow?
I have to teach tomorrow, baby.
Yeah.
He keeps forgetting. Yeah. I have to teach tomorrow. I'll be teaching in, it's a pleasure to do it, but it does mean I can't go running around. I'll be teaching in Madison, Connecticut tomorrow. I will be doing the Native Tom piece, which is a hooked yarn piece, although I am going to bring some punches just in case people want to have a go with the punches. And I am going to bring a bunch of frames so that everybody, if they want to, can work on a frame. I just think it helps aid in that. It's like insurance, for success. If everybody's working on a nice tight surface, I'll be doing that tomorrow. All right, let's get into the hellos, and let's see. Why is my thing different? Why is this different? Hang on, something changed. If I am calm, yep, if I'm calm, I can figure it out. I figured it out. All right. Ruth, great to see you. You can be there for an hour. That sounds great. I don't know how long I'm going to make it today. We'll have to see how it goes. I'm feeling okay, but very, very, very worn down, which is a little alarming because I hardly ever feel run down, but I definitely do. So we'll see how it goes. Sometimes I get my second wind while I'm here. It's great to see you, Ruth. Melissa, great to see you. Hello from rainy Sackville, New Brunswick. Rum and Coke, that sounds amazing. Linda, cheers, my dears, for hoping for some rain in Jersey. Yeah, weird weather, huh? High fire risk today with the wind and another wave of a little bit of heat. I've just got water today because I don't want to push it. Rum and Coke does sound good, though. Cheryl, great to see you on the Cape. Cooler. Cheers to colder than I want to be, Cape Cod. Hoping the show and wine will warm you up. I think it will. I think it will. Karen, great to see you. Cheers, my dears, from mild Black Forest, Colorado, and a nice cold glass of Pinot Grigio in hand. That is civilized and amazing. Kaz, you are over there in Tokyo. Good morning from Tokyo. I'm up since 3:30. Jet lag. Jet. Well, you'll feel better tomorrow, and we're so happy that you're there. And that means you had a safe flight, and I don't have to check up on you. You are there, arrived safely. I hope you're having a good time with your mom. I hope your hit list of things to do is fantastic. I will be watching. Great to see you, and you'll catch up on your sleep. You're an energizer bunny. You're gonna push through the days and have some great days, even if you're tired. It is an awful feeling though. Mom, great to see you. Happy cocktail time from chilly Granby, Connecticut. A beautiful beaver moon. Is it a beaver moon today? I should know because you gave me my diary for the year, and it's a moon diary, so it breaks the year up into the different moons and tells you what it means. So it is a beaver moon tonight. Very nice. A martini in hand and being here with you. Is Jessica there already? Did she come today? We are headed over there. Happy birthday to my mom. By the way, that's the first thing I should have said. Happy birthday to my mom. Tomorrow, after the class that I teach in Madison, I'm going to be headed up to my mom with my sister, I think already there, and we're going to go out for our traditional sushi birthday. And I've got some great gifts for you, and I can't wait to see you. It'll be so much fun. Judy, great to see you. Cheers from chilly and damp southern Indiana. I'm missing the fall colors, but I bet there will be lots of color to cheer me tonight. There will be lots of color. It's a great collection of things that we're looking at, and it's very varied. Lots of different. Oh, I think there's only one hooked rug that I'm showing you tonight, but the rest are textiles, and I think we've got one painting. But they're all going to click, and you're going to go, ooh, inspiration, because it is heavy textile picks. Catherine, great to see you. Wonderful Friday with your rug hookers always. Carol, happy Friday to you too in Northford. Great to see you. Ryan, perfect fall evening from North Texas. Hard seltzer and working on a vintage latch hook pattern. Ooh, how fun is that? Peace and love to you too. Happy weekend. Wendy, great to see you. Wendy, you sent me something. Did we solve the problem? I can't remember. Did you get sent what you needed to be sent? I just want to double check that. Your name just reminded me. Dreary day in Western Pennsylvania, but happy to be here. Great to see you. You just reminded me of something else I have to announce in a minute. Joy, great to see you in North Carolina. And looks like everybody's doing well. So my mom's getting some happy birthdays, as you should. You know what I was thinking about today? That now Judy's finishing up with putting the current Magpie Times together. So Marshmallow World, the winter edition, right? Our fourth edition. So because it's a quarterly, it's seasonal. So she's wrapping that up now, which made me think, ooh, I better think of a theme for the next Magpie Times, because the due date will be February 1st for the next Magpie Times. I know it seems like it's miles away, but it's really not, is it? I think the theme, tell me what you think of this. I was thinking, last spring it was the maiden issue and we did historic gardens. Cindy, great to see you from Minnesota. Balmy 58 today. Here too, it was about the same. It was warm, but it was windy. Great to see you. What are you bringing me? Ooh, oh, okay, not now, but I definitely want one. It's a box of chocolates. So, theme for the next Magpie Times, it will be the spring edition. I was thinking, what about, we did gardens last time, so I want to stay away from gardens and flowers. What about bees? What about the theme being busy bees? And then it'll be like a play on words. It'll refer to both bees, which will be like the overarching theme. So still kind of gardens, but like moving a little bit toward insects. But also that we will be busy bees after, quiet and bleak winter, coming back with the spring and getting gardening done and getting cleaning done and everything starting up again. What do you think of busy bees as an idea? You love that idea, Cindy. Thank you. If anyone has another idea, let me know. And help me think forward, because it is helpful to people when I have thought far forward. It's very hard for me to do right now with everything being so scattered and having so many things going on at once. But I think I like that. And if you have a better idea, let me know, because I'm always flexible and I always second guess myself too. Oh, Ginger, great to see you. Happy Friday in Louisiana. Welcome. Happy Friday and cheers, my dears. All right, so, Melanie, I didn't see you come on from cool and wet Western Washington. Diet soda only tonight. I hear you. I've got my water. Trying to stay healthy. I picked out I never know how to say gyro. You know what I mean. I had one of those today. That wasn't super dietary, so now this. Let's get into it. So we're looking at pieces that are in the folk art collection, the folk art museum collection. So this is in New York City. You know, so many of these large museums, particularly the sort of metropolitan type museums, they have huge databases online. And if you go in there, you can search their collections, right? There's usually a tab for their exhibits. What's happening now? Exhibits. What else do you have? Collections. So usually there are hundreds and if not thousands of items that are up in a database that you can look at. Those are things that they have that are not necessarily on display right now. And it's exciting to know what they do have, right? Because it's stuff that we could well be interested in. It's usually pretty well photographed, sometimes just, nah. But you get a feel for what it is, how old it is, and in your mind you can say, oh, there's lots of those in this place. I'd like to visit. You can always get in touch with museums, right? Always get in touch and say, is this on display? Will it be on display? Is it possible to see it if I come for a visit? You can always ask those kinds of questions. If it's something enormous, like sometimes I ask about rugs that are huge, and the answer is no, because they're like, well, you know, we would need like half a dozen people minimum to open this thing up, and it's just a lot of work on our end. But they usually say, but we'll notify you when it will be out on display again. So it's good to keep track of these museums because they have a lot of very inspirational things for us as rug hookers. And we do, you know, whether you are like a member or whatever, you know, you do have a right to know what they've got and to inquire about the things that they have. So it's good to keep track of what these larger museums are doing, small ones too. But it's good to be on the mailing lists because then you know when something happens, something changes, something arrives, something is opening, something is closing. You know, the more the merrier. And be careful because they typically go into the junk folder. So if you really are sincerely interested and you're not getting stuff, you might want to just look at that. And it's like one of the few things I have figured out to do on the computer is pull stuff out of the junk folder. So let's look at our first thing for tonight. Karen says, maybe busy bees, anything that starts with a B. Ooh, interesting. And Carol says, that's a honey of an idea. I like that. I like that. I was trying to think about that, and thank you for that, Karen. I was trying to think about how to make it broad enough that people could dive in, because I don't want people just thinking, ooh, I have to do a composition with a bee. So I like that. Let's keep evolving it. I don't want to make it too. I don't want to make it too narrow. Um, but I do like it, right? And let's keep evolving it. I like it. Let's stick with it and let's make it fluffier and fluffier if we can. So let's start with this too. This is going to be a great slideshow, and I don't know how much mojo I have. So let's come over here and look at the first thing that I have to show you tonight. It's called Skyscraper Quilt. So this is again from the Folk Art Museum in New York City. This is simply called, referred to as Skyscraper Quilt. So this is one of their recent acquisitions. Now, interestingly enough, I mean, this caught my eye. This really caught my eye. I am a quilter. Not lately. Obviously, I've been totally consumed with rug hooking. Really fell in love. But I historically have been a quilter. I'm always interested in quilt patterns. This is a very unusual pattern. They don't know the artist on this. It is not identified. The medium is cotton, so it's all cotton. They're putting it at 1930. That's a maybe. In my mind, that's a maybe. I mean, they know, but sometimes they're a little bit off. This is a lot of Civil War era material, right? This is before the revivals. This is before the Patchwork Place and all those places revived these exact prints. These are probably original late 19th century prints, and why not, right? They probably were cut out of clothing, maybe other quilts that had it. Karen says great negative space as well as positive space. Absolutely. It's almost like a very geometric Escher, right? It's almost like an optical illusion. It has a pop art feel to it. It's graphically extremely strong. It's also historically really interesting. So the museum puts this at, as a placeholder, 1930. They don't know who did it. So all we know is it's probably done in the 1930s. Now, curiously and interestingly, there's both material in there that is Civil War, post-Civil War era material. Tessellation, Carol, it is a tessellation pattern. Very cool, isn't it? It's very clever. And you see how this could be easily adaptable to rug hooking. If this is a 1920 piece, right, that means it's out of copyright. If you wanted to translate this pattern into a rug, what a cool rug design this would be. right? It really is. Living in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Redhead Agent Team. Great to see you. Reminds you of ice cream cones. Oh my gosh. As soon as you said that, I thought the exact same thing. It does look like cones, doesn't it? It's the stacked nature, I think, of the form. The more you look at it, at least for me, the less it looks like a skyscraper. But I think this is a really interesting piece, and I think it's an important historic piece, and that's probably why they purchased it or acquired it. So one of the things that it made me think about was like, okay, so what is exactly the era of skyscrapers that looked very Art Deco like this? I'm not talking about like the 1890s skyscrapers. I'm talking about when they started to look a bit more stylish and there were more of them. And then I thought, oh, like the Chrysler Building in New York, right? If you can picture the Chrysler Building, I thought exactly like the Chrysler Building. And then I thought, ooh, it has a stepped top like the Chrysler Building. So I had to look at the Chrysler Building because, do you know, this I'm sorry, I keep saying 1920. This quilt is dated 1930. 1930 even. Again, they're not sure, but that's just a placeholder they put on it. Guess when the Chrysler Building was built? 1930. Interesting. So this is photography from that time of, hey Diane, good to see you, of the Chrysler Building going up. Now it's an unusual building. It starts out as an unusual building at its base, and then it has a straight kind of shot for a while. But then you see it becomes tapered and very shaped at the top. There's an even better. This is a 1930s era photograph of it. You can see it does have some business at the top, doesn't it? It does taper and shape at the top, and it is quite like the idea for this. And it does make me wonder if this is around 1930, 1930s, and the Chrysler Building is also 1930, 1930s. I feel like this could be a good connection, right? I don't know where the quilt came from. It doesn't say because they don't know, right? But it seems like inspiration, the very least, the most basic conclusion that we can draw looking at this particular vintage quilt and a skyscraper from the exact same year, what we can draw for sure as a conclusion is that they are very similar in style. They have that Art Deco feeling. So isn't it interesting that in a thrift craft like ours, except quilting, that it would be an appealing subject for somebody to pull on very contemporary, state of the art architecture and create a quilt like this. I think it's very exciting. It's a very exciting piece. So I'm going to move on and let's look at the next thing that we've got. It is a hooked rug. Now it is cropped. So the picture that they have, the only picture they have in the database is cropped. I hope that they will. It might be that this is the size of the rug. In fact, it looks like it is. I'm looking at the top of the picture. This is the complete picture. I didn't crop it. It is the size of the thing, isn't it? You can see the wall on the top. Unless it's folded over, this is it. So I'm curious about this one because it says the title of this is Hooked Rug in Snowshoe Pattern. Okay, it definitely looks like that, doesn't it? Can anybody make out what the text says? It looks like to something, maybe to my. Let me know if you can read it. My eyes aren't going to do that. So the region, no, it's an unknown artist. The region is unknown, possibly New England, but it does say date 1973. Now, are you seeing 73 on this? It says date 1973, and then there's a note that says, ooh, Catherine, does it say Tom and Katie? That's interesting because the note on this piece says possibly Tom, like made it, possibly Tom Lionska. Possibly. You all are seeing Tom Katie. I'm seeing Katie now at the end, and you see Tom. Interesting. So maybe this is correct. The thing that threw me isn't the attribution. It's the fact that it says date 1973. Now, it's not impossible, right? It's definitely not impossible to make a quilt in an antique manner, right? In an older style. It's absolutely possible. But if Tom did this in 1973, man, if he set out to make a quilt that looked like a 19th century quilt, he definitely succeeded. I mean, this is like the ultimate hit or miss piece. It well could be. Lion is in the middle. Interesting. Interesting. Tom Lyon or Skahe, Lyonskaahe. I have not had time to research this name, but this is interesting because you all are seeing this picture larger, and you have made out these words. So it could be he must be a later 20th century artist. If this much information is in place, they are still saying possibly he is the artist. 1973. I didn't initially believe it, but it does seem like all the bits and pieces are falling together, doesn't it? Interesting. M. Bush says going to a local museum and seeing textiles there turned the light bulb on for me. I knew I was a mixed media artist, but I hadn't yet connected the threads that I needed. That I needed textile. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely, isn't it true? When you see things in person, it's obviously different from person to person, and I have to admit, I have a big art background, but I cannot be in a museum for too long. I just can't. I get oversaturated. I lose interest. I lose focus. I start to feel like this. Do you ever feel like this in stores and museums, like you're going to kill over? I get to that point really fast, and I don't think that like I'm taking it in more than the average person or anything like that. I maybe think my attention span isn't fantastic, and that has always been a thing for me. It's hard for me to kind of stick with it and do full day blasts at museums, even if I think I love the idea, like let's go to the Smithsonian and stay from the time they open till the time they close, and then I'm doing it and I'm thinking, wonder if there's any gift shops around or anywhere we could walk, or maybe a historic house or cafe. The exception is when I find a section on textile. That has been a game changer for me too, because when I see textile stuff, for some reason, I'm hardwired to love it, right? And who knows where that comes from, but it's just the way that it is. I see that stuff, and it's just more. It's more tactile to me. It's more compelling. I connect with it better. Just exactly what you're describing. And when I see textile stuff, it is like I can stay indefinitely. If I'm just looking at paintings, I feel like one of the Griswold families. Just remember European Vacation. They're just moving from painting to painting. But when I see textiles, it is a game changer. And I think probably a lot of us feel like that because we're here. Art is great, but seeing those textiles, it's like clues to the past. And you're looking at, and I guess fine artists do this too, looking at technique, right? My sister is a painter, looking at technique. And go, oh, those brush strokes, right? Isn't that like so indicative of this movement or this person? I don't do that as much as I do like, oh, those are really wide loops. I wonder if they were cut with a pair of scissors. It's exciting for us to see these things in person, as textile people. And yes, small historic museums, your local historical society, sometimes even libraries have collections. It's worth giving a shout out and checking to see what everybody has. Going into winter, there's nothing going on, is there? All of these smaller societies and associations, they don't have a lot going on in the winter. Maybe one Christmas party, maybe. Otherwise, it's a great time of year to kind of hit up your local organizations and say, what kind of textiles do you have there? Can I come in and photograph them? Obviously, no flash. Photograph stuff with my phone. And can I share it so other people can see it, and know what's in your collection, right? If they want to visit, or just to know, right? We like to know where the rugs are. We like to see things that we haven't, examples that we haven't seen before. It's a good project to think about doing, all of us, over the winter. Dave, good to see you. You have a 2 hour saturation point that I need coffee or lunch. Yeah, same exact thing. Clues to the past and future. So true. So true. And inspiration, right? And you never know when it's going to strike. Because I have to admit, like, it's so awful to say, but like when I went to Florence and looked at some of the famous like Botticelli's and or like when I saw the Mona Lisa and like these big important paintings, there's always people crowded. This is awful. There's always people crowded in front of them. And I'm thinking, I probably should stay and like wait to get closer to it. But then I think, nah, I think I saw it. Like, I think I saw it between people's heads. And I'm like, that's good. Yeah, but the textile stuff, that's another story. I have to get in there and get close. I'm glad that it's not just me because, yeah, it's bad. It's bad. It's a bad thing to admit to, but yeah. But you know what you can handle, and there's no point in trying to take in art and force yourself to feel inspired. It just doesn't work like that, does it? You take in as much as you can. And you hope, just like going to museums works the same way as going to a great lecture or going to church or going wherever you go to get your inspiration. You hope that you walk away and you got buckets full, and you hope it'll last you, a week, a month, a year. Who knows? This is a gorgeous piece. And I would be really curious about going down the rabbit hole. I wonder if anybody, I have a very busy weekend coming up, but I wonder if anyone has time to go down the rabbit hole and look up Tom Lion Ska or Skahi, Lyonskahe. Find anything you can out about him, because I'm so curious about this piece. And what seems contemporary to me is that if it indeed is cropped, and this is the complete rug, and the crop is top heavy like this, like it's not a square. In other words, that is way more of a contemporary approach to design than it would have been in the 19th century, when you would first lay out the four horseshoes, make sure nothing was cut off, right? Cropping anything is much more of a 20th century aesthetic. So that in itself is a good argument to the idea that this could be a 1970s piece. It's just mind-blowing, but it could be. And the other note on this piece from the museum is that the copyright for this work is under review. And what that translates to me as is we're not sure either, so we are checking it out. Interesting, right? Now, speaking of interesting, wait till you see this rug. I should have cropped it first, so there were no clues in it. I wish I had. Dang it, it's too late now. I was going to say, guess what this rug is made out of? This is, I believe, a crocheted rug. It does not say. And I'll leave it there just in case. Yeah, somebody can do the punchline. The artist is unknown, but the note says possibly Desiree Parker, dates unknown. I also don't know Desiree Parker. That would be another interesting thing to research. When was Desiree Parker busy with rug making or textiles, or if this, it says 20th century, right, with nothing more specific in place. I would think that this is a 1970s piece, and the only reason is because I have a 1970s era book. I forget who the author is. I know we've looked at it together on Coffee Time, but in the book, the author does do a small table-sized, it could be an Amish toothbrush rug, Karen. It could be. It could be Amish toothbrush, or it could be crocheted. It could be a knitted rug. It could be it could be a braided rug, really, with if there's some sewing involved. It can't be a braided in rug. I know that for sure because the swirl is too formulaic. I love it too. It does look crochet or tiny braid. Could be either of those things. No, it's not paper. It's what here's the punchline. It's Wonderbread bags. It's all Wonderbread bags. So if anybody has time to check Desiree Parker, I would be curious. 20th century. So I have a book, and I did notice in the book that there is a small rug in the book. I think it's probably 1970, 1972, something like that. And there is a photo of a small rug that is made out of Wonderbread bags. So it could be that this came before, and the example in the book, maybe somebody saw this on exhibit. I don't know if this was ever utilitarian. It could be that it's a little bit later in the 20th century, and it's kind of like an installation piece that makes the statement. Thrift, right? Be thrifty. It's making that statement. It's shouting that statement. So it's 60 inches in diameter, which is remarkably large. It is 100% made of Wonderbread bags, and the place of origin is Ledyard, Connecticut. That is where isn't that where the submarine base is? I think that's the submarine capital of the country, Ledyard. That's not far from me here. So again, I don't know Desiree Parker. It's a curious piece. This is another piece that the copyright is unknown on. It's not a pattern-driven piece, so it's not something that we would necessarily copy the design. But certainly there's nothing to stop you from, Wendy knows this better than anyone, hooking, crocheting, braiding, whatever, with bags, with shopping bags. Nobody can stop you from doing that. This particular piece does have something of a color plan because there is a little spot of blue in the middle. Now that could be a coincidence. I don't know. let's assume, Wendy, you've hooked with Sara Lee bags. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. You're so clever. Now, the first thing I thought when I saw this is I've seen Wonderbread bags lately, and they're not that colorful. So I looked up Wonderbread bag 1970, and this is what the Wonderbread packaging looked like in 1970. So let's say that this is a 1970s era rug, right? Because they have no idea. They just said 20th century. We would be looking at this packaging, and if you have enough of it, you can see there is quite a bit of white. I would say there's 30% white. New London is a submarine base. You're right. You're right. No, what is it? Um, New London. Yeah, there's a submarine sign on this. When you enter right next to Mystic, the town right next to Mystic. There's another town there. It might be within New London. It probably is. New London is like the township. Guilford? Could it be Guilford? There's another one I know that has a submarine sign. But yes, it is absolutely that area. That's where this possible artist is from, Desiree Parker. That's where she was from. So we can't absolutely make the connection between her and this piece. But this is curious, and I think in dating the piece, it's important to look at, and I don't have the whole thing in this slideshow tonight. This is a crazy thing to say, but it is important to look at the evolution of the Wonderbread packaging, because it's definitely not much later, because the packaging is much more white with very few other colors. This is, to me, the sweet spot when it's about 30% white and the rest of it is quite colorful. Because, to make a rug that looks like this, you're going to need a lot of dots. Um, Otherwise, it would be 40% white. And I don't think it is. It's very hard to say. It's very hard to say. And I'm sure that they have done a way more thorough job in receiving this. This was, I think it was a gift. Um, yeah, this was a gift. So there was they tell you credit line wise who paid for the acquisition, but when it's a gift, it says that. So I'm sure that when they entered this into the database, they did a good job with figuring out as much as they could about it. I know that this is also the kind of job that interns do, and when they acquire a lot of stuff at once, right, at any museum. Um, Sometimes it takes a while for them to put up more thorough, more detailed, or better researched information. They find out a little bit more. So, interesting piece, though, wasn't it? Now, this is another interesting piece. Let me see. Sorry, I have this out of order. I know that this is Noah's Ark. There it is, Noah's Ark quilt. Now, I have to say, this is the only image of this piece that is online, and hopefully another image will be uploaded sooner rather than later. But it's a little bit out of focus, so that's a bit disappointing. But I think we get the gist of it. This piece, artist unknown, this is just referred to as the Noah's Ark quilt. The date is between 1890 and 1910. Place, Nova Scotia or Quebec, Canada. And the medium is embroidery thread on cotton and silk. Interesting, isn't it? It is 50 inches by 70 inches. So this is another large piece. This is essentially almost two yardsticks across. Almost. Absolutely gorgeous piece. Now, I'm not going to try to open it up larger for you because we will lose the focus. This is about as good as it gets because it's a small size, the actual photo. What we can tell is that in the middle, what seems to be the arc, it's a funny shape, isn't it? It's a funny shape. I'm thinking that's the silk thread. Do you think that's a fair assumption? That to me looks like the shiniest part. Now, what I love about this piece, what don't I love about this piece? I love the very graphic nature of it. I love everything being in twos. That's very strong. There has been careful consideration going from creature species, animal to animal, to in some cases make the two animals slightly different colors. I think that's so smart and thoughtful because usually the female is not as pretty as the male with most creatures, right? Now there's a lot of people in this too, which is interesting because there's probably, you didn't break your phone, did you, Jess? there's probably a direct reference to characters, people in this part of the Bible, right? In the Noah's Ark story. These are probably people who, if you were looking at it closer up, maybe you'd be able to say this could be this person, this could be that person. The people are in dress that is more of, well, the quilt is dated 1890 to 1910. That's almost exactly the Edwardian period, right, which ends in 1911. But the costumes on these characters a little bit Victorian, but early Victorian. Just at first blush, to me, this looks like Jane Austen costume, which would be like Georgian, more like the 1820s period. So curious. I'm curious about the age on this. I feel like they're either making the characters wear historic costumes to make it look older, right? Not having any sort of reference point for like what a biblical era costume would look like, perhaps. It could be a clue to the age. It could just be a style decision. Cindy says, I love the two black cats in the lower left. Yeah, isn't that, their pose is so good, isn't it? It's so peaceful. It's funny, and looking at this, that's a great point, Cindy. Some of the animals look so natural, like the cat looks so natural and comfortable and familiar. And it's probably because the maker had a cat or cats and had easy access to what they actually look like. Whereas most of the other animals look like silhouettes from books, don't they? I mean, really, look at the lion with the tail all curled up behind him. Look at the kangaroo, right? Very, very stiff. The animals are very stiff, with the exception of the cats. I'm not seeing dogs yet, but it does seem to me like the cats were the easiest ones to do and the most successful design wise because the person who made them really knew what they look like and what their bodies look like for real, like in real life and not in a picture book. Interesting piece. And did you notice that there is a beautiful crazy quilt border around the edges? It just adds to the beauty of this piece. It's so extraordinary and exquisite. It's laid out for you like little butterflies pinned down, right? You're able to travel through the composition and look at the pairs. It's so companionable. It's so cheerful. It's absolutely beautiful and colorful. The colors in the women's clothing is so pretty, and and the colorful crazy quilt border really helps this piece along because otherwise it could have run the risk of being a very dull piece. Shape wise interesting, right? Folk art wise interesting, but it could have been a fairly dull piece to look at because of the colors of the animals, browns, blacks, whites, grays, right? But there was such an effort in this case to use the silky thread, right, to make that design choice. When you're doing a piece like this, so much time went into this. This is obviously someone who had the time to put into this. This wasn't the little woman who decided not to cook dinner for her family for 6 months so that she could work on this quilt. That wasn't the case. I'm not a fortune teller, but I'm sure that wasn't the case. This is someone who did have the time to work on it, and they had some silk thread, and they had enough silk thread that they were able to put that huge arc in the center. I think that's extraordinary. It's just a beautiful piece. It's obviously an applique piece. It's not a patchwork piece, but so many little touches in here that are worth coming back to. This is a piece that I would love to contact the Folk Art Museum and say, is this ever on display? I could stand in front of this piece for 2 hours, I think, and just look at the shapes. Because even between animals, like if you see the two ducks to the immediate right of the ark, they are posed differently, aren't they? There's a few animals that are posed differently, and it does make me feel like in this case, it's an unknown artist, but whoever the artist was, that they also knew what ducks looked like, right? Not so much bears or panthers or monkeys, but ducks and cats for sure, and snakes. The snakes are pretty good too. But what a great piece, right? What a fun piece to look at. Now, this was an interesting piece too. Because as soon as I saw it, it kind of pulled on my love of the history of quilting. I'm just about as interested in the history of quilting as I am the history of rug making because it's a very similar history because it's another thrift craft. And people went to it and got involved in quilting at the same points in history as they did rug making, when things were economically very depressed, right? And one needed to make stuff for the sake of comfort and warmth. And quilting is one of those things. Rugs are certainly one of those things. Now, this is a, let me see, I think this is another unknown. Hold on. Gathering my papers. This is artist unidentified. Um, the dates they have on this are 1941 to 1950. Um, that sounds right to me. I'm not second guessing the Folk Art Museum. I would have, if I was on a game show and someone said, "What do you think?" I would say 1930s. But when I take a second look at it and I see those big cheerful bows and the colors, 1940s seems right. 1950s to me seems too late. I'd say 1930s, 1940s. These are feed sacks, right? So that gives us a clue right there. These are feed sacks. So for those of you who are coming to the show or to the craft, and you're not sure what that means, it means that at the Depression era, right, the Great Depression started in 1929, the following years, the country was so economically depressed that there were a lot of manufacturers and brands that tried to help people out with free patterns, free materials. And one of the things that is most notable to us now is that during that time, grain companies and companies that used feed sacks, right? Like cloth sacks, right? Just to package whatever it was that they were selling, feed, right, of some sort. They produced them during this very dark period in very bright colors with the idea that while people could not afford to be buying new clothing to repair or or repair, period, never mind make something new, they knew people didn't have this in the budget. So, oh, hey, Jessica, happy Friday. So feed sacks were produced with these pretty patterns, and they are now very, very collectible. Some of them were small, kind of calico patterns, but in more cheerful colors. And during this time, the kind of look of the 30s, 40s is the look of feed sacks, because so many people needed to use this material to make clothing for the family, to make housewares, to make pillows, to make quilts. And it is a very common thing to see quilts made out of feed sacks. Now, it's not just the material, right, that was a gift during these hard times. Incidentally, this piece is probably or possibly made in Kentucky. It is cotton, including muslin feed sacks, and there's cotton embroidery, which means the faces and the details, the little legs and stuff, are stitched with a needle and thread or embroidery floss. And the dimensions are 83 by 67. Now, this was given, this is an interesting side note, this was given as a gift, right? We're talking about the credit line. Where does it come from? It came from Laura Fisher. And that name should sound familiar if you've been with me for a while, because I did quite a few shows about Laura Fisher. She passed away, I think, a couple of years ago, and left behind sort of an empire of a textile business that was like unparalleled, an extraordinary amount of important quilts and rugs. And it seems to me, because I know we did this maybe 2 years ago, talked about her and some of the pieces that she had on hand and the pieces that she'd sold in her lifetime. Obviously, this piece, one way or the other, made its way to the Folk Art Museum in New York City as a gift. So that is good to know. Now, it wasn't just the feed sacks, right, that are part of this moment in history. It's also the pattern. It was very, very common during this time, right? Again, post-Depression, the Depression and the post-Depression years. Magazines, all kinds of magazines, home magazines, decorating magazines, ladies magazines, cooking magazines, specifically like work basket types of magazines, included, if they could, as many free patterns as possible. And this was like universal. You pick up a magazine from the 1930s, early 1940s, and you will see a pattern like this. I have seen this pattern many times. It was just on one of the pages. It was a drawing on one of the pages in the bottom, and it was just the line drawing. So depending on what you did or what you needed it for, you could stitch it, right? You could applique it or onto a dish towel, or make a quilt, right? Or trim the border of a quilt. Or you could use it as a cross stitch pattern, an embroidery pattern, a rug pattern. You could use it for whatever you wanted. They gave you the line drawing, and magazines did this constantly. And for that reason, we tend to see the same motifs in quilts, like this exact cat, over and over and over and over. Also, Sunbonnet Sue, let me show you some more examples. We see them over and over because they appeared in a magazine, and thousands of people were takers, right? They said, I'll take it. I love the design. Let's do it. I need something. And they used it for everything, not just quilting, for everything. So we get hooked rugs with these same motifs as the quilt patterns. We get decorated sort of handkerchiefs, collars on dresses, hems on dresses, lots of different uses for the same free patterns. And Bush says, I'm wondering now, I know my great grandma made quilts, but I always thought it was maybe 60s, 70s, but the prints did resemble the center motif in this quilt. Now I'll have to go see. Absolutely. Yep, you have to check it out because quilts of this period, I really feel that 1950s is too late for this. 1950s, we're moving toward a better economy, right? We're past World War II at this point. There's been a economic pop. People are moving out of city centers, and the idea of the suburbs is happening for the first time. People are regularly taking vacations. The economy has come back. We tend to see less of this kind of stuff, particularly using a free pattern in the 1950s. 1930s, of course, it does depend on what part of the country you're in. If we're talking about the Dust Bowl area, then yeah, you might see this pattern for another decade. But if this is coming from Kentucky, I don't know. I don't know enough about, and nobody's asking, but I'm working it through in my head. I don't know enough about the economics in Kentucky at that time to know whether this is likely to be a 1950s quilt. But I'm thinking of it as a New York quilt, right? Because it's at the museum in New York, and I would think it's definitely not a 1950s quilt. But these patterns were everywhere. And if you pick up old magazines, good to see you, Goretti, in antique stores, you will see these patterns, and it is fun to find them. They make great rug patterns too, and you will see some of these designs as rug patterns. And then we will have that inevitable conversation. Is it a commercial pattern or not? Not exactly. It's not exactly. It was a free pattern given in a magazine, and how you use it. They were small, right? And you probably, unless you gridded it with a pencil and blew it up that way, we were probably talking about a repeat pattern because they were small. They were really small. On a magazine page, it would typically be like a quarter of the page, just to give you an idea of how small these motifs are. Marty says, Karen, teal colors are great to use when you want your subject to stand out. Oh, what did I miss? Karen says, the teal background seems unusual to me for that time. Oh, let's go back and look. Let's go back and look. The teal background. Oh, interesting. You know what? I'm tempted. Let me stretch this out. Let's look at this a little bit together. Do you notice the actual quilting on this piece? It seems to be stretched on something, or it's hanging. It's pulling. I see it's pulling. You know, teal is one of the deco colors for sure. It is a light teal. This is definitely one of the deco colors. It's, for me, it still feels like a 1930s, early 1940s quilt. That's still the right color palette for this. It's very bright and cheerful, right? There was like in the 1930s, the color palette was cheerful because it was like forced cheerfulness, right? Things were really tough, and it was like forced, you know, we are going to be cheerful. And that's why the feed sacks were colored the way that they were. You do get feed sacks that are in like browns, but they're much rarer, and they weren't super desirable. And when you think of, if you remember the whole, and I remember this in the late 80s and 90s, the patchwork place, right? They put their catalog out, and they would always put out lines of quilt fabric that represented different eras, right? And they were reproduction fabrics. They were not original designs. They were reproductions. They always had tons of lines of Civil War prints that were taken from actual Civil War textiles at the time, and also feed sack. I think how they got to sort of the toppermost, and incidentally, Patchwork Place is done as of it's not even a year since they, as a publisher, folded. But the feed sack quilts, I think, is what carried them for so long. 90s into the 2000s, the feed sack quilts are still popular, but these were replica fabrics, as they would have to be, because you can get real feed sacks, and they are on eBay, and I have some. They are a little fragile. They can be a little bit brittle. They're not all the same from one to the next. Even if they're cotton, right? It's not apples and apples. Some of them feel more like homespunny, more of an open weave, more fragile. And others feel very tight, like almost too tight, like frantically tight. So they are quite different from one to the next, and they are beautiful to find. But the ones that are the most valuable, if you shop for them, like on eBay, it's not the brown ones or the ones that are like I don't want to say like an army green, but there was a color that was more like a pea green, heading toward like a 1970s, like an avocado green. Not super popular. And you think they might be popular because they're more rare prints, but they're not. I mean, if people want feed sacks, they want them in the signature colors, right? The teal, the cornflower blue, the petal pink, and that like butter yellow color. That's what people typically want. And that's what people wanted then too. It must have been so exciting at this time. One of the sort of, I think, highlights in otherwise very difficult lives, particularly I think of women. I mean, obviously men too, walking along train tracks, and we remember what those photos looked like in movies from that time, and certainly everybody suffered hugely. But it seems to me, from a woman's perspective, and maybe this is not a fair remark, but it seems to me like it's typically the job of the woman, as the mother, wife, whatever, to create happiness in the house, or at least the illusion of happiness. So certainly I think these feed sacks helped with that. And these adorable patterns that were for free in magazines must have helped with that quite a bit, don't you think? I mean, I would have looked at a magazine and said, whew, phew, I'm going to use that cat, or hey, I'm going to use Sunbonnet Sue. Here's two of them, right, from the same quilt, and just different feed sacks. There's quite a few of this one online, but Sunbonnet Sue was often in there. Do you notice how on the one on the left, it looks like they appliqued the brim on the bonnet upside down? It's at kind of a weird angle. I think it's supposed to be flipped up. Doesn't matter. But you could see they gave you the pieces, right? Because the arm is in a slightly different position too. They gave you the pieces, and you just put it together, right? Just like with this cat. Oh, wait a minute. Just like with this cat, you got the cat, you got the shape of the basket, and you got half of the basket handle. So you see that this person traced the cutout from the magazine, or maybe traced, it doesn't even look like they cut out the magazine. It looks like they traced it with a piece of white paper from the magazine and then traced it again onto cardboard, right? That's how much whoever did this did not want this piece, the pattern, to be ruined. They wanted to save it. So it looks like they traced it and then put it onto cardboard and traced it again so that it would be more permanent, so that they could cut all the pieces out as templates. But they gave you the cat, the basket, and half of the handle, and then you would have to put the second part of the handle into position. Now, in this example, they've got it swung way over to the right, and there seems like the handle should be coming down into the silhouette of the cat, but it's not. It's just a design choice, but it makes this one a little bit different, right? A little bit more interesting. So whoever has this was something from Pinterest, but whoever has this collection of squares, right, of quilts, of quilt blocks, is very, very lucky, because they are going to have a beautiful collection, not finished, it's just basted on, right? But they're going to have a nice collection of blocks that they can finish and put into a proper quilt. They look nice and white and clean. Also, butterflies were a big thing back then. Exciting, right? And if you go down the rabbit hole this weekend, look up feed sack quilts, you're going to see a lot of repeat patterns like this. If you run to an antique store or something like that, and you find a stack of old magazines from the 30s, 40s, and you flip through them, you're going to see these free patterns, and you're going to go, oh, that's the cat, and oh, that's a butterfly. It's going to be easy to find them, because even though they were different from issue to issue, they were pretty much the same motifs, with very, very few exceptions. Now I'm going to move on to our next piece for tonight. This is called so at the Folk Art Museum in New York, this is referred to as the Oregon Pioneer Organization Quilt by Yuda Aletha Kelly. And her actual name is Eudoxia Aurora Kelly Niblin. So they know the artist on this. So she didn't go by Eudoxia, she went by Yuda. This was made sometime, well, her life, okay, this was made in 1923. Her life was between 1865 and 1945. So she was, let's do the math. I got to do the math. I'm not good enough to do it in my head. So let's do 65. How can I do that? Come on. 23, 33, 43, 53, 63. She was, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I did that the wrong way around. 65, 75, 85, 95, 105, 115. So she was almost 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. She was almost 60 when she did this quilt. Is my math right? I think my math is right. Epically big project here. Let's talk about what this is, because this is not a standalone project. This is a genre of quilt that is well worth knowing for when you see it, because you will see these. Once you know, you will see them. This is a 1923, and this comes from Oregon. This is silk and silk embroidery, so it's all silk and silk threads. It is 73 by 68. This piece happens to be framed. It says framed. Maybe it's on a board. It doesn't look framed, but it says framed. Credit line, it was a gift in this case. This was done in 1923. So there is a note, copyright-wise, it's earlier than 1928, which for us this year, that is the cutoff year for public domain. That means that this piece is in the public domain. Does it mean that you could copy this piece? Never in a million years. And you know why? Because this is a state fair ribbon quilt. Now, they're not always called exactly that, state fair ribbon quilt. Sometimes they're just called crazy quilts. Sometimes they're called ribbon quilts, or award, reward, trophy, whatever word might be plugged in there. What this is a quilt that is based around this collection of, oh shoot, I just kicked the, wait a minute. Joss, can you get Papa? I just kicked the light and it went off. Joss, go get Papa. I need help. I need help with illumination. So this is based around I'll open it up for you a little bit. A collection of ribbons that Eudoxia had. So let's look at what the ribbons are, and then we'll get a feel for what she was into. Now you see the outside of the quilt is kind of a postage stamp quilt. It's just a bunch of squares, and it's done in diagonals. It's not like a trip world around the world pattern for you quilters, right? It's just like diagonal stripes. I don't mean just, because it is color planned and it's very clever. Let's see if we can see, and I think you're going to have a better chance than me. This is the size of the photo. So this is what we get. Now, I can see the years. I can see, can you all help me out here? I'm seeing all 1840s, 1850s. Do you see whether there is a starting point, like it starts in a certain year and it goes around the years, or does it seem like it's like some here, some there? I'm seeing a few 1848s. And what can you make out what they're for? Oh, Embush says it looked like award ribbons. I'm guessing horse races. So the fair makes sense. Yep, that would make sense. They're often horse ribbons, aren't they? Interesting, because it's not just the central ribbons. And there it looks like there's a handkerchief in the middle. And it looks like there's signatures on it. So I wonder what that's about. Aren't you curious? I wonder what that's about. Whether somebody, obviously, I was going to say whether somebody won something. I think somebody won something, but more specifically, whose handkerchief that is. If it was like somebody signed it and threw it into the crowd or something like that, or it was picked up and then an autograph put onto it, something like that. Something, maybe it's like the jockey or something. I don't know. But it is, just get Papa. it is a cool looking piece, and this is not a super rare thing to find a state ribbon quilt because it's material. You get to do two things at one time: use material, right, free material, and show off your winnings, right, or the family, whatever. So it's not just the ribbons that are going around the handkerchief in the center. There, it looks like there's more ribbons, or possibly there's more fabric thingies around the next border. You see what I mean? I wonder what those are, because at first I thought maybe they're tobacco silks or something like that, but I don't think so. They look like they have too much text again. So maybe more advertising, something like that. A lot of the same dates. Yeah, even for me with my bad glasses situation, it does look like there's lots of repeats. Thank you so much. Lots of repeats in there. It's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting. Now, I want to show you another example. It brings up lots of questions and it makes me want to go right. You notice how some of the ribbons, at least the one at 12 o'clock on top, is completely threadbare. And that is a product of in a few places, it's threadbare. You know, silk is fragile, and whatever dye is coloring it, it has the potential of eating through it, and it just like disintegrates. It looks like that's what's happening there. I would love to see this quilt a little bit closer up. I've just pulled up this one as another example. It's not a large file, and I could not. This is another like State Fair ribbons quilt that sold at auction, at an online auction, not like an eBay, but like a proper auction house. And they didn't even put a complete picture. They have about 20 or 30 pictures that are crops of the different blocks in this quilt, but not one picture that is the entire quilt, because you would like to see, in terms of like harmony and design, what it looks like together. Not a single one, but I thought so interesting. M. Bush says, so cool. A use of mementos. I wonder if quilting awards. Interesting. You know, I don't know, but I don't think that in the 19th century awards were given for things like quilting and handcrafts. I think it's much later in the 20th century that we start thinking about thrift crafts as being good, better, or best. I don't think we did that earlier because I don't think people would have wanted to display a quilt or a hook drug earlier because it was almost like advertising that you were poor, the fact that you would have even made the thing. So our opinions on thrift crafts changes like in the 1920s when there is this great sort of renaissance around handmade things. Everybody falls in love with things that are handmade, right? And that's like one of the sort of signature things about the 20s and 30s is that handmade things are better. But because that's like something that is in vogue that kind of transfers over into daily life and becomes like a cultural thing. But until that time, it was like, better not tell anybody that I'm making the stuff for the house and that we're too poor to afford to buy it, you know. But it is fun seeing those quilts. And I have to say, I wonder if my sister's watching. Mom, if you're watching, can you tell me if Jess is watching? Because I have something funny to say, but I don't want to say it if she's watching. Let me see if my mom's still on. They might have turned off and had their martinis now at this point anyway. I'm gonna wait for her to give me the word before I tell you. I have this great idea. All right, so that was the. I'll just give her a minute. That was the Eudoxia Aurora. Yep. Okay, so that was that quilt. Let's look at another crazy quilt. Right? Which state fairs were that early? Iowa. That's a great question, Karen. So that was Oregon, and we all saw 18. What was it? 48 many times. I don't. That would be worth researching. In fact, I have a book on the bookshelf out there. It is a history of state fairs. It's one of those things like early department stores that I'm very interested in. I love it when people get organized and do stuff together and show the public displays and things like that. I'm always super interested in that part of history. That's a great question. Feel free to shout out in the thread if you know the answers to that. Cindy says Minnesota. So I'm not hearing from my mom. So I think they probably are having their martinis. I have to tell you something so funny happened a couple years ago. My sister is a horseback rider, and my mom was a horseback rider, and Jocelyn is a horseback rider. It skipped right over me. Not That's a big no thanks Satan for me getting up on an animal that size. But my sister did a show, a horse show, and she did well in the show. And the thing was that they ran out of ribbons, like the horse ribbons, and so they gave her like some dog ribbons, like they were ribbons, like the silk ribbons. They look like that, but for dogs, because somebody had bought the wrong ones, and by the time like her whatever division was riding, and it was time for her to get a ribbon, they were out of the horse ribbons, and so they gave her a bunch of dog ribbons. And we laughed about. I don't. I say we, but I mean, I know I laughed about that because it just seemed so funny to me. So what I did was I got on eBay and I bought a bunch of lots of dog ribbons from like vintage. They're early 20th century. They're not Victorian, and I have about 100 of them. So I'm gonna make some time. I'm hoping before Christmas to make like a small wall quilt that looks like one of the quilts we were just looking at, made out of dog ribbons. See, sometimes I wonder if I'm off, if that's too teasy of a gift, if it's worth spending that much time. I've already made the purchases and I already have the ribbons, but sometimes I think, is there something wrong with me? Is it worth spending that kind of time to create a one hit wonder kind of a joke? But if it turns out to be pretty, because I was thinking of doing it like as a log cabin and just putting them in log cabin figure eight. I don't want to cut them, but I thought I could kind of tessellate them, right? We'll see how it goes. I'll let you know if I start working on that. I'll do a video or something in case anyone's interested. Bush says, you're probably right. I was thinking more of the 40s, 50s state fairs. I have seen some very old crazy quilts in Valor fabric, fine fabrics, but don't know if they bragged about them. I don't know either. I think we weren't even using the term folk art in the 19th century. I think it was during like the arts and crafts movement that we start looking at the work of untrained artists, the folk, right? Just the plain folk, not the artists. We start looking at that body of work and going, ooh, there was some good stuff in there, wasn't there? It took a long time for people to become interested in that niche. And now that that has opened up in the 20th century, folk art, no matter what you collect, is almost untouchable. Um, so yeah, so it's a great thing that the pendulum swung and the emphasis is now heavily on folk art is great and people should collect it. But at the same time, it's very hard to acquire good examples of it because there's so much competition for it these days. Diane says, I love the idea of the dog ribbon quilt. It's a bit naughty. Maybe slip in, yeah, Judy, maybe I should slip in one horse ribbon so I'm not a complete jerk. I should see if there's maybe one more lot with a horse ribbon. So fun. But they're beautiful colors. I have to say they're beautiful colors. So it will make a beautiful looking thing. I'll make it small. I won't make it like so it takes up like a whole wall in case the joke isn't as funny as I think. But I thought it would be a fun thing to do. Yeah, I like that. So let's look at another example of, and Cass says, I've seen dog ribbon. Well, your pup gets ribbons all the time, right? For being such a good boy. I was thinking about making one, but if it seems very hard to do, you mean making a quilt? I don't think it is hard to do. You know what I think you have to do? Let me come back over here. Hang on. Let me come back to where we are. Kaz, you know what I think you'd have to do? If you're using this is the next one we're going to look at. A hold there. If you're using the ribbons that you just got, like new ribbons, not like 1840s ribbons, you should be fine, like sewing them. But if you're including ribbons that are a little bit older, I wouldn't put like interfacing. I wouldn't touch them with heat or anything like that. I would sew them onto a not fusible backing, like just plain cotton or muslin or something like that, just for support. But if you're working with ribbons that already seem strong, you're good. You don't want to cut the ribbon because just the nature of the way a ribbon is woven so tight, like machine woven so tight, as soon as you cut it, it's going to fray like crazy. It's going to be hard to kind of staunch that. So I would cut them as little as possible. I'd be more inclined to like, if you're trying to do a pattern, I'd be more inclined to try to overlap them than cut them because if you cut them and you get raw edges on ribbons, it's going to be trouble. But see how it goes. Ribbons are different from ribbon to ribbon, because I know the kids got ribbons last summer doing a scavenger hunt, and the ribbons were made out of material that, like, it was a complete synthetic. I don't even know what it was. I mean, it was probably some kind of polyester. It was very, very thick, very thick. Oh, you could almost get a paper cut touching it. You know what I mean? Um, so it really depends on the material. But ribbon can be fragile. So experiment with a little bit, but be smart about the pattern that you choose so that you don't have a lot of cutting to do, because you might end up with a lot of fraying. That would be my guess anyway. Karen says Oregon State Fair started in 1861. Ooh, interesting. So what are these ribbons from then? Let's come over here, because didn't they say 1848? So maybe they weren't from a state fair. Maybe they're just from the track. Wait a minute, that's the wrong one. Because we think they're horse ribbons, right? I wish the picture was more in focus, and it's not. This is another piece that I would be curious. When is the Folk Art Museum going to put this piece on display? It's not currently on display. Yeah, these say like 1851. Maybe this isn't the Oregon State Fair. It just says it's from Oregon, United States. And I said State Fair because these quilts are often State Fair ribbons, but this one can't be. This has got to be something else. Do you all see horses on them? Does it seem like there's horses running? Maybe they're all horse ribbons, nothing to do with the State Fair. Quiltessa, great to see you. You know what? Are they all 1840? Okay, 1848, 1849, 1848 through 1854? Is that the most recent one you all see? Interesting, because that's still not late enough to be the State Fair. But if it's horse racing, it wouldn't be at the State Fair, would it? Because that would be essentially gambling. I don't know how that works at all, but I wouldn't think that you'd find. I think that you'd find horses being shown, um, but not raced. Interesting. I need to get closer to this quilt. As soon as I have time, I do want to make a note of some of the things that I'd like to see, like a shopping list at the Folk Art Museum, and just write them. This is still going to be a big piece, though, at 73 by 68. That's still a large piece. I don't think they'd be inclined to just take that out at short notice, because they'd say, well, we would need, by law, they are required to have multiple people handling it. And the size of the piece and the material of the piece and the weight of the piece all dictate how many handlers they need. And then if they do need handlers, they are obliged to call people in, right? Those people get paid. So there's often a lot of reasons why they don't take things out to show. But I think if you're ever working on, just FYI, if you're ever working on like a academic project, like you're writing something, or it's not just idle sort of curiosity, which is also very valid. But I think if you're working on a project, they're more inclined to help by showing you stuff. If I was working on a book on the history of ribbon quilts, I would be like insistent that they take that piece out for me and I can see it closer up. It is a remarkably pretty piece. And the one after it, I have to say, even prettier in a different way. This is referred to as the Cleveland Hendricks Crazy Quilt. I'm going to stretch this open for you too. The date on this is sometime between 1885 and 1890. Unidentified artist whose initials are J, sounds like the lottery, like the Powerball, J, F, R. JFR. Who is that? Who was JFR? So it was made in the United States. It is 75 by 77. The medium, the materials include lithographed silk ribbons. So that's what we were looking at in the last one too. They were like award ribbons, but going around the border, those were definitely lithographed, right? Interesting. And Bush says Kansas seems to have had a state fair at least talked about in 1910. See, isn't this interesting to get into it? Isn't it interesting to get into it? You know what would be interesting? Oh, God, don't get me started. You know what would be interesting? Is to research these state fairs and images of textiles from the state fairs. And at this age, they are all in the public domain. And do like a book of going from state to state, state fairs, like the earliest examples of textiles, it's going to be mostly quilts, right? It's not going to be rugs in the state fairs. Wouldn't that be interesting? Ooh, wouldn't that be interesting? Because you can include a little bit of text, a little bit of history about that specific state fair. Every one, I'm sure, included different things because in terms of geography, I mean, we are a really big country and we prize different things. I'm not getting political. We prize different things from region to region, right? And there's certain areas that are more sort of farm heavy or animal sort of husbandry heavy, and there's other places that are more product and manufacture heavy. And I would think that fairs would reflect represent, right, the people who lived in the state. So that could be a really interesting one. State Farm book. Yeah, State Farm. Isn't that insurance, State Farm? Um, I think that would be so interesting. Let's keep talking about that. So, lithographed silk ribbons, silk and wool with cotton fringe, and silk and metallic embroidery by J.F.R. So I'm gonna let me unlock this. I have them all locked. The images. State Fair. State Fair. That's it. Yeah, it was like a Freudian slip, Diane. Okay, this picture's a little bit bigger, thank goodness, because some of them are despairingly small. So we are seeing, ooh, that is fringe on the side. So when they say fringe, sometimes we think that fringe is always like tassel-y fringe, like long stringy strings and threads and yarns. Not necessarily. Fringe is anything with like like a regular repeat, like a pattern, but not straight. So like rickrack can be referred to as a fringe, but this is even more. This is like little diamonds or something. It might be cut work. It might be that it's wool and they've like cut it, possibly even sewn around the little triangles. Who knows? We can't see it that close up because the photo isn't quite that good. Embush says, wow, printing on fabric that early. I know it, right? Now I might go off and find out when people started trying to lithograph on fabric. That would be awesome. Will you report back if you do? That would be another great conversation. I love printing, but especially combined with textile. Me too. Me too. Yeah, they were doing a lot of printing early because if you think about it, feed sacks even earlier than like the Depression era, in the Victorian period, they were coming printed. And that was burlap. They were able to print on like burlap coming out of India. And that was much earlier in the Victorian period, like 1860s. And probably even earlier examples yet, earlier than that. But yeah, we are seeing, I'm looking for pictures here. I'm seeing lots of different materials. We just named the materials. Some blocks where they have obviously done some embroidery and some stitches with threads and yarns and floss. We're seeing lots of that beautiful fan motif in all of the corners with a repeat of that trim. It almost looks like a velvet zigzag trim or something. Little painter's palette there, a little oriental fan, and we are seeing printed silk. We will continue to see printed silk and even printed flannels come in tobacco packets, right? That was also for the women. That wasn't for the men. Those little flannel flags and pictures and butterflies, right? All of those motifs that came in tobacco packets, those were not for the guys. Those were for the women, right? Those were patches. So women could sew those together and turn them into a quilt or use them as a patch, do something decorative with them. They were both advertising and meant to be decorative. But yeah, these are beautiful examples of printed silks. And this quilt, and again, this is referred to as the Cleveland Hendricks quilt. And if you're joining us late, these are all things that are in the Folk Art Museum in New York City. I'm looking at the hand that's pointing. Isn't it funny how they position the silhouette of the hand pointing to the two people? I can't make out who the two people are, but that's like almost like an etching quality of lithograph that's been printed onto silk. There's remarkably little loss in this quilt, isn't there? And then the symbols of like good luck, which we often see. We often see many symbols of good luck, because people are still quite superstitious during the Victorian period. That is why we still see so many swastikas during the Victorian period, because they were a symbol of good luck. Of course, that symbol got hijacked in the 1940s, but Until that point, that was a very common symbol to see. You see the boot on top too. Sometimes the things that they're showing us on these crazy quilts are clues to the occupation or the trades that are represented in the family. So makes you wonder. This is exceptionally well done. And yes, it is a scrappy thrift craft. These are fine materials, but many of them would have been gotten for free with advertising products. This is definitely someone who had a lot of time to do this, right? So this would be the kind of person who had enough money that they weren't doing everything in the house themselves, because this represents a lot of time, but yet they weren't so wealthy that it was preferable or possible to have like a bed cover that was manufactured. So we are hitting, because this is a Victorian era, right? This is before that sort of renaissance of handicrafts and people really putting a lot of weight and reverence on handcrafts, right? Just the idea of making them was important. This is way before that. So this is still an example of a thrift craft. Screen printing was done in ancient China. Now, Melanie, what else does it say about that? Are they doing that with like a stamp, like not obviously not a potato stamp, not in ancient China, but I'm wondering if they're doing it with like a wood block or something like that. If that's the kind of printing that was done. Interesting. Textile rabbit holes tonight. Now I'm going to keep going. I don't feel like I have a ton left in me. I think I'm going to skip over a couple that I want to return to later because we kind of have a trend going right now. So I'm going to come back to, on Monday, I'm going to come back to samplers and embroideries. For tonight, I'm going to stick with quilts because I can feel my energy waning. I'm so sorry. I have been at a dead run for quite a while. And I know it's like, maybe it doesn't seem like that on ribbon candy hooking, but the Tigger stuff has been like, I think I've done 8 hours of conference calls in the last 2 days. It's been a lot. Um, so I'll probably go for another few minutes, but let's save the huge subject that is needle points, embroideries, and samplers, so needle arts. Let's save that for Monday, and let's keep looking at what I have here is another very curious example of a handmade quilt. This is a cookie cutter quilt. It is exactly what it sounds like, and it is as charming as it sounds. So, again, artist unidentified. We don't know who the artist was. This isn't actually the name given to it. This is what it's referred to as, cookie cutter quilt. And medium. So this was made in Pennsylvania. The medium is silk thread with paper padding on linen. So in other words, let's hold on that. Let's hold on that. Credit line. So this was a gift. This piece is 16 and a half by 17 and a half. So it's not epically big. It's very small, in fact. This is a decorative piece, 16 and a half by 17 and a half. Maybe it's a crib quilt, something like that. Because that's very small. It's too big for a dollhouse quilt. Thinking it had to be a crib quilt. That's tiny. And this is in the public domain. Because it's, I'm sorry, I didn't say its age is 1841. 1841. Now, that is early. So, right. So you can see what they've got going on here is just like we have done historically in rug hooking. If you don't have an idea for the design, you go Edward Sands Frost style and you make a stencil, or you find a stencil, you buy a stencil, you use a stencil to start laying out your design if you don't feel like you are a designer. What is a great idea? Oh, Leah, great to see you. You just put your daughter to bed and you're happy to join you. Happy Friday. And before that, I missed it. I'm sorry. M. Bush said, yes, places in Asia invented much earlier than the West. Comprehended lithography seems to have been invented in Europe in 1796 in Germany. I would think, I don't know, but I would think like the whole Gutenberg press, right? It would be this kind of era because before the press, how are they printing? I mean, you can use wood blocks and different kinds, like if you think about Indian wallpaper and that kind of block, right? That's just applying pressure, like human pressure onto it. But I'm thinking if you're going to manufacture a run of something like silk ribbons, that there's going to be thousands, tens of thousands of, maybe hundreds of thousands of, you need a press. Like you need a machine, right? You're not, this isn't going to do it with your hands. I Love Lucy style. Conveyor belt is not going to do it. You need a machine. So that would make sense, because isn't the Gutenberg press, doesn't that go to about that time? I don't know. In Germany, I would guess somewhere in there. And that would make sense, because then they could manufacture. Then it would be crystal clear. Remember the lithographed faces on that Cleveland, what was it? Cleveland something quilt, Hendrix. They were. It was like perfect. They were like photographic. They were so fine. All of those lines. That would have to be done with the use of a machine, don't you think? Although, when I think about it, like Rembrandt, right? He did etching and stuff using glass on glass, and he got that kind of line. But then again, he could not have done that for hundreds or thousands or many thousands. He could do like a run of, I don't know how many, four, right, before the image on the glass was overused and oversaturated and exhausted, whatever the right word is. It would be different if you had to do tons and tons. But it is the conversation about what kind of printing and when happened on textile that is interesting. I have so many books, and I was cleaning the studio up a little bit today too. I did see some books on textiles, printing on textiles, and I think I put them in the donate pile. Now I'm having second thoughts, but just because I thought like they were more for when I was interested in quilting. But this is why I never throw away books, and I'm surrounded by boxes of books like a crazy hoarder. Because as soon as you throw something out, and I didn't yet, it's still there. Yeah, I had a whole box that were geared for quilters, right? Like how can you create a surface design on a textile? I had lots of books on that subject when I was more into quilting, and less into, for rug making, that's less useful of a conversation. But it does have me thinking now that we're talking about this tonight. A quilt for a pram. Yeah, absolutely, Karen. It could be a quilt for a pram, because it's just a dinky little thing, isn't it? So 1841. Now that's the interesting thing, because these are not cookie cutters like from boxes, right? In the, again, 1940s, 1950s, 60s, right through the time I was growing up. I'm going to come back to this image, but we saw, do you remember, and you would find these again in antique stores, boxes of cookie cutters. Now, this would have been very handy for this person in Pennsylvania in 1841, but they probably didn't have these kinds of cookie cutters. They probably had the copper cookie cutters, don't you think? This is much later, but man, I'm only showing you this image because I think these are so cute. Look at the spelling of the word cookie as well. All metal, right? These are all animals. There were so many companies who put these out, different shapes, and you could do the exact same thing with your rug hooking pattern, right? Lay out a bunch of cookie cutter stencils. What a great Christmas project that would be. Wouldn't that be fun? Now, really, wouldn't that be so much fun if you think about it? If you have cookie cutters from when you were young, or when your kids were young, if you laid those out and made a rug design for the holidays, maybe it's like a tabletop thing, and you put your cookies on it. Like when you make your cookies this year, you put your cookies on it. How fun would that be? That would be such a perfect thing to make. We should make one of those on coffee time or something. That would be really fun. But I mean, I remember when I was younger in the 70s and 80s, we had cookie cutters that were like, now let me think about it. Snoopy, lots of Snoopy. Um, we had ones that were like contemporary characters, like the Smurfs and Strawberry Shortcake and stuff like that. Um, but when I was the youngest, I think it was more like Winnie the Pooh and Snoopy and stuff like that. Maybe Tom and Jerry, like that kind of thing. But there were without a doubt there were character cookie cutters, and we had them, and I loved them. And whether they were the Christmas ones or not, it was so much fun having them out at different times of the year. And you could find different sets that were like TV shows or movies, right? Disney or whatever. Judy says Haptic and Hue is a fantastic website for text. Okay, Haptic. I'm going to spell it in case you watch this later and you don't see the thread. Haptic and Hue, Hue, is a fantastic website for textile history with hours of podcasts. Ooh, I'm going to write that down too. to keep you company while you craft. Judy, thank you so much. Haptic and Hue, Hue. Karen says, was there a hatchet in the there was a hatchet. And I think that probably was for President's Day for like cutting down the cherry tree. I mean, I hope it was. I hope it wasn't like a Lizzie Borden reference. I think it was probably for President's Day. And Judy says, "Oh, I just listened to a podcast from Haptic and Hue on medieval cloth staining to mass produce. What? To mass produce banners and signage and the like. They also have one on cotton feed sacks." Judy, thank you. I'm going to be listening to those. I've been really struggling with things I feel like listening to lately. So that is going to help me out a lot. And Melanie says silk screening was done in China and Japan. It wasn't done in a production run. The designs were done with pigments through a loosely woven silk. Interesting, like silk screening, right? Like dragging the color, like modern day silk screening. It sounds like interesting. This is all incredibly interesting. M. Bush says Britannica says lithography is 1798. Nothing about fabric, but it could be transferred to a rubber roller. So technically, could be used on a lot of surfaces. Maybe not heavily marketed till the 1800s. Yeah, probably. And then who would use it? Who would use it? I'm wondering out loud. Um, this is an interesting conversation. This is its own monster that is like snowballing right now. I'm thinking about floor cloths and not linoleum yet, but the predecessor to linoleum that would have stencil design on it. You sometimes see that in older houses, that the tiles are like an early linoleum. You know the material I mean. It's not coming to me, but they were often painted, and I'm thinking that roller technique, right, with a print, like a printed thing, for each one would explain why the color on so many of them is rubbed off. Interesting, interesting. I have seen wallpaper done many times at historic villages like Cooperstown, New York, Mystic Village, places like that, Sturbridge Village. Different, right? It's different than what we're talking about, but in theory, there could be some crossover here. Um, because certainly the manufacture of wallpaper and matching up, particularly with large scale prints and murals, matching it up from one paper to the next was big business too. And that was like sophisticated printing at that time, about the same time too, right? 1700s, 1800s, so even a little bit earlier. These are all things that the more we talk, the more we find all these great crossovers and all of this information and inspiration, right? You sink right down into it. Somebody said something that I wanted to get on top of again. The coloring the medieval cloth and stuff. That got me thinking again, making connections. Let me just get some water. My throat's really bothering me, and I can't tell if I'm getting sick or if it's because I've been in the studio for 2 days kicking up dust and stuff. If that's really bothering me, and then talking a lot with conference calls, I don't know. I hope I'm not sick because I'm teaching tomorrow. I feel fine. Um, I'm thinking about in terms of color and repeating color. Um, as late as the Revolutionary War, right? So we're talking about the 1770s. At least in this country, they didn't have a uniform color, right? They didn't have uniforms. At least the British soldiers. I don't know what the genesis of their uniforms or their cloth was, but certainly the Minutemen did not have. The Americans, right? The future Americans did not have the same color clothing, and they just all tried to wear like a similar color. So the word would go around like dress in this color. You don't want to dress in the wrong color, right? That could be bad. But they didn't have uniforms, so women, right? It had to be women were making their uniforms and trying to make them the same color so that they were recognizable as an army. But I mean, they weren't getting necessarily the same color, and their uniforms from one to the next didn't look identical. And that's a bad example, right? Because we're not talking about attempting to print any number of things, but just the idea of even repeating the same color at this time is going to be challenging, isn't it? Because if we're talking about the 18th century, we're not talking about aniline dyes yet. We're only talking about natural dyes, at least in the United States. So interesting. Let me catch up on this. Thanks for the new podcast. Exactly. Yeah, I think we're all going to be listening to that. That sounds amazing. Let's come back to this cookie cutter thing. This is fun. Now, this probably is Karen. Yeah, a pram quilt or something like that for some little person, some little token thing. But this is at 1841, right? I don't know anything about the history of cookie cutters, but man, I would like to know more about that too. I do see in antique stores cookie cutters around this time, but they're usually either the copper ones that are now expensive. They would have been less expensive then. That look very handmade and they're easily misshapen, right? Because they're very malleable. But also the ones that have the flat, solid back and then just like a soldered on line in the shape of something. This could be either of those. But I'm thinking if it's the ones that are flat, right, and then they have the line that makes the shape under it, it would be hard to trace that when it's down on something. So I'm wondering if they're like copper cookie cutters. We're not going to know the answer, are we? Because even if we found cookie cutters in these shapes, there's no saying that they're the same ones or manufactured by the same person. Um, this is an interesting idea, though, because this is obviously someone who wanted to do something colorful, cheerful, decorative, and happy looking, but didn't have an idea for a picture or something like that, but struck on the idea of doing something with the cookie cutter. And it's interesting also that the museum notes that there is padding. So it's paper padding. I think that that is, and again, I'm not second guessing the museum, but I think that's a little bit incorrect. English piecing, right? English piecing is done. Quilters, tell me if I'm wrong because I'm going on my memory 100% here. It I feel like paper piecing, English style paper piecing, is done with paper. Like you create an applique over a piece of paper and then you attach it to your backing with the paper still in it. Am I off base there, or is my memory still solid on that point? At least I feel like that's called English paper piecing. So it's if that's the case, this is not padding. This is piecing. This is basic standard piecing. Um, but yeah, not padding because padding suggests height. You know what I mean? And if it's paper, we're not talking about height. We're talking about just not screwing up the shape while you're trying to get a nice crisp X going, right, with your fabric. That's why the paper stays in there so it can be nice and tidy and crisp. But padding implies also soft, and I don't think that's part of this. I think these are just straight up applique. I think usually you take the paper out of the applique. Okay, Diane, but you do use the paper to wrap it around? Interesting. You tuck and stitch around your paper piece. Okay, and then you pull the paper out at the last minute. Is that the idea? Does the paper, I'm just curious, does the paper sometimes rip when you pull it out? If it was, for example, like I think it's not really a cross. It's not really an X. I think it's like a Maltese cross. Yes, you cut the background and you pull the paper that way. I see. Now, does anybody have any insight as to why they would have left the paper in this one? Do you think it was just too hard to get it out? Maybe the paper, is it possible the paper could have been too thick to pull out, or that they stitched so much that it was then too late to pull it out? Could that have happened? I haven't done this kind of quilting, but I'm imagining the different scenarios that would result in somebody creating a pretty piece like this that still had lots of pieces of paper in it. Interesting. It's a beautiful piece. At any rate, it's a beautiful piece. And when I look at the different shapes, yes, it looks like there are some that are cookie cutters, but doesn't it look like there's some that aren't? Like the square. Do you think the arrow was a cookie cutter? There's some that look like, if you look at the top right, definitely seeing that Maltese cross, but I'm seeing what looks like a hat. That can't be a hat, right? Or like a person with shoulders, maybe a bee on the bottom right, or maybe it's a bee. Maybe that's a bee. Maybe a shield, an egg. Um, Interesting, right? Odd bits and pieces. I'm not sure that these are all cookie cutters. They would be some wacky cookie cutters, wouldn't they? I think. Do you think some of them are just scrap pieces that they fit in, and they tried to put as much in color wise as they could? It really is an amazing piece of folk art. Judy says, we typically take the paper out before quilting, but there are museum examples of the paper being left in for extra warmth. Oh, interesting, for extra warmth. I'd assumed they didn't get washed much. Well, that is an interesting angle. I like that. That makes sense because extra warmth if it's a tiny baby, and but then again, don't tiny babies, barf and poop all over everything? Maybe. But if it's just for if the baby's sleeping in the crib or in the pram or whatever, there's a little bit of extra warmth, and you would expect the baby pretty quickly to grow out of it to boot. That makes a lot of sense. That's an absolute possible scenario. Maybe someone finished it later than the original maker. True. And you can cut multiple pieces of paper, so it's okay for one or more to rip. Yeah, I guess you would by accident, right, rip them, and then you'd be like, dang it. So you'd want to be sure you had the template somewhere else. And Gretty says, funny, my current project is a pillow with a similar design, but I never saw anything like this before. Sometimes I feel like, if you sit around and you're thinking, oh, damn it, I turned the light off again. Oh, well, I'm going to leave it off. There's something going on with this stupid light. Sometimes when I think about creating a design, and historically, people sitting there, I do think about Edward Sands Frost and what he did for women with his tin stencils, and how much it helped so many women feel confident about designing because they had a stencil, they had a starting point. It's so intimidating to look at just a blank piece of paper. It helped a lot, just that little bit of confidence, having something to trace. Same thing. Sorry, I'm totally in the dark now. Forget it. I'm not going to call him again. It'll take him 45 minutes to get down here. It's curious to think about that same sort of principle being used for quilting, because I never think of it as being a helpful technique in the quilt world. I think of it as a rug technique. So this was an eye opener for me. I found this really interesting. And this is another thing I found really interesting, and I'll end on this one for today. This is another quilt, and this is called a sampler quilt. This is a genre that we still see today. It is dated, right? This is a dated idea. This piece dates to somewhere between 1935 and 1945. Hold on, I'm just going to see if I can press. Damn it. I'm just fooling with the light. Forget it. 1935 to 1945, somewhere in the U.S. That's as narrow as that goes. This is 100% cotton pieces, and this piece is 84 by 72. Artist unidentified. So, unknown piece. Now, let's look at this together logically, because we are not completely ham and eggers, right? We log on often. We look at stuff. We've gone through hundreds of books together on this show. We have accrued a lot of knowledge, and I feel that we are very apt at being able to date stuff at this point. Now, 1935 to 1945, I'm looking at these patterns, and I'm thinking, I'm going to default to you quilters again, and this might be something to dig into, but this looks like a later quilt to me. Whereas before, it looked like an earlier quilt. I don't know. I recognize some of these patterns, obviously the basket ones and the Dresden and the windmill and the wedding ring and all of that stuff. The flower one and the compass rose are the ones that are getting me. I'm totally at peace with the Baltimore album. That's like an applique block. But the flower one on the bottom right, I suppose that could date to the sort of flower mania of the 1930s. It could. It could. The compass rose, man, the one that's in the red and the green, like on the right-hand side, 2/3 of the way down. I'm not saying that that's a more recent pattern, but I certainly don't know. I have a lot of quilt books, and I love looking at them, and I don't really note years, right? It's just for fun that I fool around looking at my quilt books for inspiration. But that compass rose is kind of throwing me the most, because that reminds me of a category of quilts that are referred to as New York beauties, that center on the form of a compass rose, and that's much later. I don't know, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I think the patches in this, it's obviously like an orphan quilt. In other words, teal background again, Karen, you're right. In this case, like a calico though. Like is it a calico? No, it's not a calico. It's quilted. No, I'm probably wrong again. I'm going to stretch it in just a minute. I'm probably wrong again. I thought it was calico because I was seeing flecks of white, but I think it's quilted into little squares, right? And that's why some of it looks white because the light is hitting it. I'm seeing my image much smaller than you all are seeing it. And also, I can't see. So, um, this is what at one time was referred to as an orphan quilt, and that means that all of these orphan blocks that didn't get put with other quilts, right? Somebody started all of these and didn't finish them and then put them together to make one composition. Now, this shouldn't work, right? In theory, this shouldn't work. Cobbling together all of these one-off blocks, tipped at different angles, different colors, it really shouldn't work. But doesn't it work well? Isn't it gorgeous? Isn't it gorgeous? Probably the ages of these blocks are could be different. They could span the course of decades, right? We're not necessarily looking at. I don't buy 1935 to 1945. If I was dating this quilt, I would say 1920s to 1970s. That's what I would say, because some of the colors too, I'm feeling like I don't know, a little bit later. Doesn't matter. What matters is that this is a great, Leah just said it better than I could. Absolutely love the randomness. It is. It's like the Breakfast Club of quilts. It's like all of these misfits together in one place. And you do see patches of quilts, and I always think to myself, God, it's such a pretty patch, but what am I ever going to do with one? This. This really, and it's up for grabs. But what I'm thinking is, if you were just to take, how many is this? 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 19 or 20 motifs, something like that. If you were going to take this many motifs and just scatter, toss them, stitch them down, would all of your compositions come out as well as this? Kirsten says 1848, the compass rose block so it's been around forever. Okay, so it could be much older. The compass rose block has been around since 1848. That's a big year in this episode tonight, isn't it? What does it mean? What does it mean? We've said 1848 so many times tonight. I feel like I got to get a lottery ticket or something. I got to do something with those numbers. It makes me wonder whether every kind of scatter toss quilt configuration of orphan blocks like this would come out this well. What do you think? Because when you look at the colors are not, they don't have a lot in common. There are a few that have really vivid reds and greens. Those, including the compass rose pattern, those do strike me as newer blocks, I have to say, the ones with those colors. But then there's a bunch that have that feed sacky 1930s era pastel palette, and those seem older to me. And then there's a couple in there that have what look to me more like the 1970s palette, and it's hard to tell. Let me stretch it a little bit, and then we'll log off because we're getting right to our usual time anyway. I love the idea of it. Oh, it's not a horrible quality. It's not great. It's not horrible though. Okay, I can see it a lot better now myself. I'm looking at the patterns that are in there. Interesting. I still think there's some blocks in here that are newer. But I love the randomness of it. I really do. Judy says those blocks could be from different generations even. I bet they dated it from the most recent fabric in it, like maybe that teal. True. I love I love the teal with the orange. Overall, with this quilt, even though, let me make it a little bit smaller again, even though it's a real mishmash of colors, I feel like there has been some kind of thoughtfulness about color planning. Let's name the colors that are the prominent colors here. Obviously the teal, the orange, the yellow, the brick red, and the dark green. strike me. Yeah, there's a little bit of coral, there's a little bit of lavender, but those are the primary colors. And does this quilt work so well because they're similar colors, even though the blocks are completely different? And some are geometric, some are pictorial. I don't know. I feel like this you're looking at lightning striking. But having said that, hang on. This is our last image for tonight. This is on eBay now. Um, Sorry, this was the best photo they had of this. This is on eBay now for about $226, including shipping. That's a lot, I think. I think that's a lot. I think we could make this. So we're seeing the wedding ring block in the center, a couple of those overlapping. It looks like they've been appliqued on. Um, so we're seeing one, two, three, four, five, six different motifs. Six if you count Sunbonnet Sue and what was he called? Something Sam. Sunbonnet Sue and what was Sam called? Overalls? Was it Overalls Sam? Something like that. If you count him too, we've got one, two, three, four, five, six motifs. That's not as many as the last one, but it is interesting to look at. And it's, you know what? I did a 2-second scan 15 minutes before I started running the show. I looked up sampler quilt on eBay and this came up. And so I used the photo and I put it in here for us to look at. But I just wanted to make the point. I would say this is 1970s, 1960s, I think 1960s. Using the wedding ring block, I think is a little bit older. I think that's probably 10 years old. I think all of the block motifs are 10 to 20 years old, but the quilt was made a little bit later because the stripe on the border looks to me like early 60s. The striping on the bottom left, right, that has a bit of a floral, that looks more like 40s, 50s. So to me, it looks this who cares, right? Who cares? But I think you're going to find sampler quilts on eBay and other places on the internet that are that span the years. I think you will find that sampler quilts are a 20th century invention. They are maybe the ultimate thrifty textile because you are finding these orphan blocks, and we all find them. If you go antiquing or you do yard sales or flea markets and stuff, you do see them. And don't you always think, God, that's so beautiful, but what the hell am I going to do with one or three or four blocks, right? It's never four, though, is it? It's always like seven or, some impossible number, and you think, oh, man, forget it. But don't you wish now that you picked all of these up all along, all through the years, because you could have been whacking together these sampler quilts, and hey, maybe sometimes they come out great. This one to me isn't as successful as the one before it, but it's got something. It's still, if these are blocks that came from your family, this would be super, super special, wouldn't it? Those Marty says, how cool to rug hook the previous rug. Yep, totally. The previous quilt, absolutely. Wouldn't that be awesome? That would be absolutely awesome. And what another great design idea. Just finished quilt blocks. Boom. You could even do this on your computer. You could pull up pictures of quilt blocks that you like and print them out to size, paste them down on a piece of paper to whatever size you want, fool with them, turn them, twist them, experiment with the layout, and then say, that's it, that's my pattern, and then either blow it up or trace it as is and do it as a hooked rug pattern. That would be a really cool pattern too. Just another idea, like the cookie cutters, of something that you could do that's really thrifty and scrappy. Doesn't it seem like the right time of year to be doing this stuff, heading into like the dead of winter? Not to be depressing, but doesn't it seem like the right time of year to be doing these super scrappy, thrifty things? I feel, for me, I'm feeling all of this stuff powerful. It's driving me crazy that the light's not on, so I'm going to say goodbye to you sooner rather than later. I'm going to get an extension cord that is like, that you can't pull that plug out of that cord, because I can't tell you how many times during the show it went off, but I wasn't on camera and you didn't know. I'm going to get that fixed. But gosh, I had fun tonight with you. This was a great conversation as usual. You all are so knowledgeable, and looking stuff up as we go is so helpful because we get answers to stuff right away. I can't do it while I'm sitting here like this, change screens. I wouldn't dare. the show would just end and I wouldn't know what I did and we would never reconnect. So thank you all for doing research this, by the seat of your pants as we go along. And many of you just know things, right? We all know different things. It's so interesting to put our knowledge together and to talk about design and to talk about the way that people have lived and the things that I'm guessing these are all projects that were done by women, with the exception of the snowshoes. Remember the snowshoes hooked rug at the beginning? It's so interesting to think. I love to put myself in the place of women who lived at different times, and think about what their lives were like and what they had to work with and how much time they had to do it in. Um, and the fact that they would ever get anything done or ever complete any project is amazing to me. Even just when I think about the way my grandmother lived when I was growing up, and I would stay with her in the 70s, and man, she was up, honest to God, at like 4:30 every morning popping popcorn for the birds, and it would be out on the stoop for the birds every day, and the day would just start, boom, and she would be busy all day long. The washing machine that had the crank like this, that she always said, don't put your hand in there, and it was so tempting. I didn't, but it was so tempting. I so wanted to put my hand between those wooden rollers because I was so curious. But I didn't. And life was just like that, with all of the old stuff, the bread box, the Wonderbread, the Frigidaire, all these things that, we're talking about in our episodes now. And then finishing up the evening with a piece of folded newspaper, with like one napkin ripped in half on a folded up piece of newspaper with my toast in the evening. After dinner, having the toast cut up into long lines, not diagonally like triangles, but long lines, and then putting on the Lawrence Welk show took us right to evening when we went to bed. And then the whole thing would start again at 4:30 in the morning with the popping of the popcorn for the birds. And, even then, that wasn't that long ago. And it seemed like she was busy and life was pretty busy. I don't want to say hard, right? Because then I'm like layering my own impression onto it. She might have felt like she was living the life of Riley and everything was easy and great, and she was always felt grateful and happy and blessed and all that stuff. But it is curious to think about how other people lived, what their lives were like, and the best way I think to know these people is to look at the stuff that they did with their hands, right? Because that is like their diary, right? I bet you anything that none of the people whose work we looked at today had a diary, right? Because they probably didn't think their lives were worth noting down. And what would they write? Why would they spend time like that? But they did make things for us to look at, and we look at them here on nights like tonight, and you can get to dreaming, right? And definitely about all of the pieces we looked at tonight. Let me just catch up with I remember these blocks in the 1970s. You have a great weekend too. I just want to catch up here. Have a great weekend. We even had Charles chips delivered. I don't know what those are. I'd have to look that up. Overall Sam, overall Andy, overall Farmer Boy. That was the 1960s. Bought your book while watching. Oh, thank you so much. It was so much fun. So you know what? I'm gonna definitely feel better after the weekend. I will be teaching in Madison tomorrow. Native Tom will be hooking the turkey. That'll be a lot of fun. And if you're watching, I'll see you afterward. We'll go out for sushi and celebrate her birthday. Happy birthday once more to my mom today. And I will be back with you on Monday. And let's pick up where we left off. I still have many papers left. We will look at the needlepoint pieces and the samplers and embroidery pieces that are new acquisitions for the Folk Art Museum in New York City. Happy weekend, everybody. If you need me in the meantime, ribboncandyhooking@gmail.com. Be thinking about bees. Be thinking about honeybees, beehives, gardens. Be thinking about bees. Just get that going for our theme for the first Magpie issue of 2025, which will be due on February 1st. And that will be the spring issue for next year. And Judy is putting the finishing touches, and I am proofing this Winter Wonderland issue, which will be out imminently. Happy weekend. A potato chip company. Oh, great. Oh, great to know. Charles Chips. Oh, how fun. Potato chips delivered. Oh, man. Why did things ever have to change? Happy weekend, everybody. I will see you all on Monday when we pick up this conversation again, and I have